ActivityPub is a decentralized social networking protocol. It allows different web applications to interact so that their users can share information, even if the websites or applications are running different software. Yeah, do you think that this is a either-or situation? Like, ActivityPub has to loosen their grip on some of this ideological stuff in order for it to actually take off in any meaningful way?
I think they can hold on to an ideology, but I think they should get a new one.
Okay, well, all right. Hey, this is Shri. I'm a YC alum and a research engineer focused on natural language processing for search.
Hi, this is Will, and I'm a YC alum and independent researcher who's worked across e-commerce, cryptocurrency, and financial industries.
Welcome to the Technium, where we talk about the edge of technology and what we can build with it, an optimistic look at the road ahead. We're two guys discussing edgy, fringe, or overlooked technologies over a couple of drinks. Our show has 4 segments. First, we give a high-level overview of what the technology is. Second, we talk about what it can do today. Then we let our imagination and optimism take over and see how the world would change if this technology was readily adopted everywhere. And lastly, if we believe in this future, how can we take a position on it? We can't be experts in everything we cover, so if you've got insights on today's topic, let us know in the comments. And be sure to check out our audio versions on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, so you can go about your day as you listen. But first, in the spirit of chatting over some drinks, what are we drinking today?
So more kombucha for me, health aid kombucha, but this time it's citrus immune boost. I don't know, it's, you know, that emergency stuff. I guess it's that in kombucha. So we'll see. Yeah, what you got?
So it cost you like $5 instead of
yeah, right.
I've got Son of Man. It is a Basque cider. I guess it's an apple cider that is kind of yeasty and funky.
So, Shri, so given that you have this apple cider going on, what are we talking about this week?
Yeah, so this week we are talking about ActivityPub. ActivityPub is a decentralized social networking protocol. It allows different web applications to interact so that their users can share information, even if the websites or applications are running different software. Some ways that people are implementing ActivityPub is in apps like microblogging, decentralized video and image hosting, and other social networking use cases. So the biggest instance or the biggest use case for something like ActivityPub, which people might have encountered, is something like Mastodon, which is a decentralized Twitter alternative, which has been growing in popularity since the various Twitter news and events.
You mean shenanigans, but yes.
Yes. But have you used ActivityPub or Mastodon or anything like that?
I haven't used ActivityPub directly, but I have used Mastodon, and I don't know, a lot of people complain about it, but I think it's just fine. I think there's some oddities that come out as a result of it being decentralized, like how to follow people on different servers. But once I kind of figured that part out, it wasn't too bad, honestly. Maybe like the sign up flow. I did it a long time ago, so maybe it's better or worse by now. I don't know. But yeah, but ActivityPub, at least on the surface, I thought it sounded like a good idea. However, I've never really found myself inclined to look more deeply into it until this episode, because I never encountered a case where I felt like I needed to use it. But that said, I think ever since I built my first app, I've tried to stay away from consumer internet businesses, because I figured out, like that's the nature of this stuff. I am totally ill-suited for this. So I don't think I've really had a chance to build anything that would use ActivityPub. What about yourself?
Yeah, I've used Mastodon a little bit, and I was part of the new wave of people who used it in the most recent exodus from Twitter, and it was fine.
Right. but yeah, I still see you on Twitter, and I'm also on there also, right?
Right. So we can go into that a bit later about whether ActivityPub is a technological solution for maybe what is ultimately a social problem or a product problem. But maybe first I'll give an overview of what ActivityPub is. So we were referring to Mastodon. Mastodon is a particular app which uses the ActivityPub protocol. And the ActivityPub protocol is is trying to be standardized as an internet standard protocol, which allows for a variety of applications, not just a Twitter-like use case. It's supposed to support almost any arbitrary publish-subscribe type operation. So the ActivityPub protocol, you can think about it in a simplified way that the primary users are these actors, which might represent a person, it might represent an organization, or maybe a automated bot account or something like that. And what they do is that they publish activities such as, publish or follow or like on other types of objects. These objects can be things like an article or an image or a video. And so in the case of publishing something to Mastodon, which would be probably the equivalent of tweeting something on Twitter, what would happen is that the Mastodon server would use the ActivityPub protocol to create an activity such that a person, yourself, created a note object. And this activity would be federated across instances. So I would send that command to my Mastodon instance, and then it would subsequently forward that message to the servers that my followers are on so that they can see my update.
I see. And so I guess it's a protocol. The ActivityPub protocol is a way for servers that all do the same, if not similar, type of things to pass messages to each other to have at least a eventual consistent view of what sort of messages are on the network at any one time. And in that way, you can get a community of people talking about and discussing over whatever it is that they're doing without having a centralized server. And so in a lot of ways, I guess it models email where everybody can read everything that people are saying. I mean, obviously you can have private notes and DMs on Mastodon and stuff, but generally that's the idea, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know what the spectrum is between decentralized and federated, and maybe they are the same, or maybe there's a slight difference. But in general, I would say this is federation in the sense that it's not that everybody is running their own ActivityPub or Mastodon server.
Yeah.
Like you probably would not be running your own. I think it's a fairly cumbersome process. But similar to signing up for...
which is a pity because that has forces to centralize the thing. I know in cryptocurrencies, the Ethereum Foundation gives a lot of weight to how easy it is to run a node because they want to encourage as many people as possible to run a node. Otherwise, you're going to aggregate because not everybody wants a node. So people say, sign up for ours. And so yeah, like ActivityPub or Mastodon servers or any servers that you would run on ActivityPub should be relatively easy, but I've always heard people complain about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. It does seem like a weakness, and we can get into that.
Yeah.
But at least for the time being, the distinction I want to draw is that it's federation in the sense that there are some, handful of servers that are probably going to be in popular use, similar to like how there are a handful of email providers.
Yeah.
And many people sign up for one particular instance. And then these instances on the back end have this server-to-server communication, which is specified in the ActivityPub protocol by which they store and forward messages between the users that are across instances.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So that's sort of the ActivityPub protocol. It's a pretty complicated protocol in that if you go in cold and you try to read it, there's a lot of jargon and specification, and I think it's pretty hard to just read that and basically from first principles implement it correctly. That's the sense that I got. There were a lot of like blog posts that were basically explaining around like, okay, like how do you parse this thing? How do you read and interpret these objects? But yeah, it's a pretty heavyweight, but I guess like very, very formally specified protocol.
Well, also I've read blog posts that complain on the other side of the spectrum where the spec is underspecified, ambiguous, and so on and so forth. And because it seems like it's a little bit designed by committee, as well as a sense that there's no way ActivityPub can cover all use cases, so they're purposely ambiguous to let implementers figure out certain things, which would be deliberate omission. So yeah, I found it hard to read as well, and so a lot of what I did was read the guides about which part to read in order to get a sense of what actually was in the spec before diving into it.
Yeah. But I mean, I think the cool thing about ActivityPub is that by being fairly loose in not specifying like a particular shape of how an app can work, you can compose the primitives that it provides in order to make all different kinds of apps. So we've been talking a lot about Mastodon because I think that's the biggest use case for ActivityPub right now, at least the biggest consumer use case.
Yeah.
But you can have other ActivityPub apps, like, for example, I think we can name a few. PeerTube and PixelFed are media hosting platforms. PeerTube is kind of a YouTube alternative, and PixelFed is kind of a Instagram alternative. And you can have blogging platforms. I recently saw some Hacker News headlines that Medium and Tumblr are trying to jump on this bandwagon and support ActivityPub. So maybe those could become instances or peers in this network. But basically, you can use the same protocol to build all kinds of different apps, and potentially you could have these things peer and deliver messages to each other. So maybe a use case here would be that those of you who are following us on YouTube, if we were to instead publish on PeerTube or something like this, then you might be able to get notifications on your Mastodon client that we published a new video, right? And so this is something that's not really possible in centralized platforms. Like if we publish something on YouTube, you might not be able to see it on your Twitter feed or something like this. But
we would have to explicitly build something that connects the two, or like Zapier or somting like that.
Zapier or IFT or something like that.
Yeah.
But this is natively supported in ActivityPub. I don't know exactly what the limits are of this, and we were talking a little bit in the pregame about how probably different apps would have an allow list of what type of activity they would be willing to receive and display to their users. But I could imagine that it makes sense that something like Mastodon, which has just a feed, would be willing to show video updates or image updates from something like PeerTube or PixelFed. But you could imagine that there's some other different kind of app, like maybe a GitHub alternative that uses ActivityPub, and maybe Mastodon wouldn't show PRs or something like that in the feed.
Servers can pick which other servers that they listen to, but also you can choose. Individual users can choose to subscribe or not subscribe to individual accounts to see what data goes by. And so I think those are the type of possibilities that in my mind get me excited about ActivityPub, but all anybody in that world talks about is Twitter clones, which I think is a little bit of a pity, but we'll get to that later too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just a very high level overview. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that if you're interested, we'll put in the show notes all the references that we went into about the implementation details. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. So is that the main thing that gets you excited? Is the interoperability between apps?
I want to say the short answer is yes, because I am of a generation that remembers a time before the internet, and I also grew up with the internet. There was like a small sliver of time in which that was the case, and I remember when the internet came out, it just seemed like there was a lot of possibilities. And to me as a kid, like it wasn't like I was looking to do a lot of things. I just wanted weird and fun things, right?
Yeah.
And so the type of things that you could do back then were quaint compared to what you can do today. Like this is like sending emails, participating in news groups, reading like lists of like whatever the what was Halo before it was Halo? It was Marathon, right? But yeah, making web pages, learning HTML, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um but like when I think back to from today, like why did the internet get so much adoption? And we can also get into this later. I think it was just the distribution. And so in the same way, I would like to think that ActivityPub gives people a way to have a proliferation of deconstructed content or like little snippets of data that you can put together in your own way again. And the idea that it's permissionless, that you don't have anybody telling you what you can publish on there. If people don't like it, they just won't subscribe to you. But like, um, if you have that sort of thing on there and you can put it together in a lot of different ways, I guess the thought is that, like the internet when it was first coming out, you would have a similar synthesis of things in which there's a lot of recombination, and you're able to kind of explore what those recombinations would give you to give you different experiences on the web. And so that's kind of a hand wavy way to say I think the potential is there, but it's really hard to say specifically like what that is. And it could just be that centralized platforms like did all the iteration through this space already, and
Hmm.
what we found are WhatsApp, Instagram, TikTok, and I guess like Facebook. And so
Yeah.
maybe there are others, maybe not, I don't know, but I suspect there is more potential in my mind, at least. But whether it's actually the case or not, I mean, somebody needs to build startups and see if there's a market for it, right? So, but
Yeah.
yeah, that would be where my excitement would be for ActivityPub.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that there's been this pipe dream, which is a pun. If it's not immediately
Right.
obvious, I'll make it obvious. But there's been this kind of elusive dream from I don't know where it originated. I'm going to say Yahoo Pipes, but you're going to scoff because that's just whatever I grew up with. But
Right.
basically, I think somewhere in this like Web 2.0 era, there was this glimmer of possibility that apps would interoperate with each other via these APIs, and that you
Mm-hmm.
would be able to take information from one application and use some type of something like Yahoo Pipes or some way of piping information from one thing to another and maybe remixing it in some new and novel ways.
Yeah.
And I think that even when Yahoo Pipes died and got shut down, when Twitter first came out, which was probably kind of around the same time, people were treating Twitter as though it was a real time pub/sub protocol for the web, like the missing pub/sub protocol of the web. And I remember like people were explicitly talking about it on those terms, which was kind of weird because this was definitely a venture-backed company, but people were treating it like one of these like core internet protocols. And people
which
were building.
I thought was the risky at the time, but I was just like,
did you called it even before they started cracking down on all the clients?
No, not publicly. I just thought it was odd because it was just kind of a hint in my mind. I didn't like explore it. I was just like, it's odd because does nobody remember Microsoft? But I guess maybe they know something I don't know. I mean, this is me and my more naive days, I guess.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, but I mean, it was interesting. Like people were definitely treating Twitter, and this was like early days of Twitter before it really had much of any like fancy features. Where basically Twitter was you followed a bunch of accounts, and they would emit these small streams of text, and people would do all kinds of interesting things because you can when all you have is like a text field, you can. It's basically up to the receiver how they want to parse it, right? So people would try to stuff like some type of semantic information into the tweets, and you would have like automated bot accounts or whatever that would like, I don't know, send like weather updates or something. Like they were using it kind of like in the way you would use like a public like airspace almost to broadcast.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen one where a plant had a Twitter account and it would just tweet how wet its soil was, and when it was too dry, it would start. It's basically like a notification service to ask humans to water it. So
right.
It basically used Twitter as a pub/sub mechanism for any sort of like service, big or small.
Yeah, and so I mean that's interesting because it's kind of piggybacking on top of this like micro blogging or social network, but it's basically what you really want are the feed of activities, feed of updates from the plant monitor, right?
Yeah.
But people were building on this on top of Twitter, and then all kinds of stuff happened, right? Like Twitter kind of rug pulled everyone and said, no, we're not a platform company, we're a media company, and we're going to like focus. They went all in on celebrities and Justin Bieber and news and journalists being supported on Twitter.
It's the same mistake that Yahoo did. I mean, at one point they declared themselves as a media company as well. I forgot who did that. Somebody did that, but
in Twitter, I think that was like Dick Costello or something. But
at Twitter, no. But I was thinking Yahoo. But yeah, I think Dick Costello did that, and so at Twitter, and so it's just a shame, I guess. And so I think that let a lot of the air out of the developer ecosystem, and seems today either nobody remembers that about Twitter, or it's just people assume that that's probably just not possible. No, everybody's been burned before. Nobody's willing to try again. Because I do remember. Do you remember app.net?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Yes, okay. Yes, but you can
by
go
all
into
means,
it.
No, by all means. So one of the current partners at YC now, his name is Dalton Caldwell, and he started something called app.net as one of his subsequent ventures. And it was basically a Twitter clone, but with no advertising, and instead relying on user developer subscriptions. And I really liked the idea that it was a thing that was what we were talking about, which is basically an event bus for social networking, but you could conceivably have other things that are piggyback off of it, so it becomes like a feed or a river of things that you can publish to. And so instead of REST APIs where you have to keep polling something for information, it just becomes a push API where it's just a river of notifications that you pick stuff off of, and that seemed pretty exciting. But my wallet did not match the words coming out of my mouth because I did not end up paying for it. Like I couldn't think of anything that I wanted to use with it at the moment, and it seems like a whole bunch of other people shared the same sentiment because we didn't know what to do with it. And so, I mean, app.net eventually shut down, and
Right.
nobody's visited the idea since. And so now that we have ActivityPub, I don't see a lot of excitement towards that ideal. I'm almost saying like it's like ActivityPub sounds like a slow public Apache Kafka or something like that.
Yeah. Right. Well, you could think that like blockchain is also like a slow and public
Right.
Apache Kafka, but
Yeah,
I think like
yeah.
ActivityPub doesn't have as much. It's not trustless in that.
Right.
I think like you do have to assume that the instances are going to like the instance operators are going to stay up, that they follow the protocol, et cetera,
Yeah.
all of this stuff. But
That they're not going to publish your private tweets, and tweets, stuff like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
And so I think those are knobs that you can dial on that. But the idea, I think the idea of like a public river of events from applications around the internet that you can pick off is still a strong idea in my mind. And I think instead of just APIs, I mean, like even like, I don't know, do you think that would replace something like webhooks?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if people
I
are
don't know.
necessarily like aware of webhooks being a thing, but they are probably
Well, developers are.
Yeah,
So,
developers are. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So, anyways, maybe we're getting a little bit off topic here, but like, what, like, I guess it's just to mark the idea that this seems like it's something that would be useful, but it just seems like it's either unfashionable now, or the idea has kind of played itself out and nobody wants to touch it for the time being because there's so many other exciting things that are going on. Like what's your take on that and on AppNet and it's app.net and that kind of vision of a river of events on the internet?
Yeah, I think that it's actually gotten lost. The reason why I wanted to spend a little bit of time going into this history is that I don't know. I think only maybe old timers like you and I, if we could call ourselves.
I don't even feel like I'm an old timer, but
Right.
like apparently like there's a new generation of developers every 5 to 7 years or so, and they don't remember anything that's come before. And so I guess by that metric, I'm like way out there.
Yeah, like, and I'm younger than you, and I'm feeling like an old timer because I think that people don't remember Twitter and we're picking on Twitter specifically because it was played such a central role in this idea back in the day, but people don't remember Twitter as it was then.
Yeah.
I think people look at Twitter now, and it's a very opinionated, kind of product-oriented app, right?
Like a political, it's product-oriented in its execution, and the content is very politicized, rage-inducing sort of thing if you're not careful who you follow. But like the vibe is a little bit there, or what do kids say nowadays? Energy. So energy is different. So yeah, I don't know.
But basically, I think the thing that people don't remember, which is what we're trying to sell, is that at some point Twitter was literally a dumb pipe. Like people were just treating it like just a thing, like you said, an event bus. You just shove data in there, it fans out and gets sent to whoever's subscribing to it, and it's up to them what they do with it. I think even like in the early days, like Twitter didn't even have proper threads or retweets or at tagging and stuff like that. Those were just basically, you would just use sigils like the at sign and the hashtag sign and whatnot, and that's what would indicate that you're trying to do something. And so but basically that flexibility allowed you to use that same infrastructure to do all kinds of things. Like you could, like you said, have a plant monitor which sends updates about its status. You could similarly do something with weather updates or crime updates or whatever, and just use it in this very flexible way. And I think, like you said, I think that generation who is familiar with that has maybe aged out of this, or maybe they just lost interest, and so I don't think people have really
I want to say in
revisited
some ways you age out of social media, because when new social media came out, I was like, I want to use this, but I don't have anybody to use it with.
Right. Yeah. So I think that this idea kind of got lost to time, and app.net tried to revive it, but they really didn't get much pickup. Like, I remember it cost something like $11 a month or something like that to use it.
It was comparatively cheap, but I was just like, I'm not sure what I would use it for, even though I like the idea. That's the type of feedback you don't want to hear from your potential customers when you do customer tab. Yeah, it sounds like a great idea, but doesn't pull out their wallet, right? So
Right. Yeah, and so I don't know. So meanwhile, ActivityPub has been there in the background. I was actually somewhat surprised with the timeline, because ActivityPub seemed like something that was happening now. Like somehow there was some new renaissance or revival around this, but this is like a decade old.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, some of the things that we cover as the edge of technology are actually should be called retro episodes. Honestly, like this stuff has been around for a little while. Well, it's not so retro. Like the things that we think of retro are things that were before our time, quote unquote. But like so, like we pick on things from the 1960s and 70s. But like, yeah, ActivityPub's been around for a decade or so now, right?
Yeah, I think it's been through some different iterations where there were some earlier versions, and then it's slowly got, I don't know, more flexible and started to support more use cases. But anyway, I think it's really now come to a head because of the Twitter shenanigans and this mass migration to Mastodon, where people for the first time are getting introduced to this idea of federation and a federated federated applications like Mastodon. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting, but I think you brought up a good point in that 10 years, in that intervening 10 years that this protocol was being developed from this sort of technical engineering point of view. This was a period of a lot of iteration for just traditional social networks. Like a lot of the paradigms that we now know, like news feeds and
the like button.
Yeah, and stories, like button, stories, all these interaction paradigms all kind of got invented very quickly, maybe in the 2010s, right? Or matured very quickly in the 2010s. And you brought up like TikTok, for example, which is a relatively new type of application as well. Like I think it's a riff on Vine, which is a little older, but like I think it's even that is a relatively recent type of development. And so I wonder, for ActivityPub, which purports to support any arbitrary type of social application, like now and in the future, like, is it relying on the idea that we have run through the idea maze and we've found all the paradigms that work? Or is it possible that there's going to be some new development, some new paradigm like TikTok 2.0, which is going to come out in a couple of years? And would ActivityPub be able to support that, right? Like, how flexible is this thing?
Yeah, I think that question cuts to the heart of whether I find ActivityPub exciting or not, and I think whether it has a future or not. Because when I look through its vocabulary of the things that you can refer to in the protocol, the verbs that it has seem to be just one-to-one copies of the type of things that you can do on Facebook. So, for example, you can follow people, which is typical of a lot of social networks, but they also have verbs for travel to indicate that you move from location A to location B, or that you have moved from one place to another. And so these are just kind of the types of posts that Facebook has. And I just wonder
Right.
if they just kind of took that to say, well, our goal is to beat Facebook, so we're gonna have to get to a 1-to-1 parity, feature parity with them. So that's why we included this stuff. And as I'm reading it, I was just like, I don't, I don't, I don't think this is the way to go, because I think the potential for like a river of events is bigger than that. And so I would think that if it has room to grow in the future, it has to do things that Facebook does not and cannot do, not to try to like replicate its features 1-to-1. And so one way it could go is that the ActivityPub vocabulary can be extended to other sorts of things that are more general, or be like other types of applications co-opt the verbs in ActivityPub to do the things it needs to do. For example, the CRUD apps co-opted the HTTP verbs to have CRUD, which is what? Create, update,
Read,
delete.
update.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And they co-opted like get, put, post, and delete, right? To match it up that way.
Yeah.
So I would say that's really the case, in my opinion.
Yeah, because if the way that the ActivityPub taxonomy or vocabulary or whatever works is that it's always one step behind the innovation that's happening at these centralized companies, then it's always going to be this something less than, right? Like it's an alternative to, it's the kind of soy milk of the compared
well,
to regular milk or whatever.
Because like even if they formalized it as a spec, they don't have a mechanism or some sort of like process or mechanism in place to discover new type of activities that people are doing. At best, they can just kind of wait until some sort of centralized service, and then they argue about take forever to argue about exactly what the spec should entail to put it as like one of the things in there. And I don't think that's the way that you would become relevant or be a central part of the internet ecosystem for people building stuff. And so I think one of the other ways that it would have been great is if somehow the vocabulary of ActivityPub, the actors and the verbs or they call activities, which are the verbs, and then the generic objects, which are like notes, web pages, video, messages, that sort of things. If there was a way to compose them into the different objects, if there's like some sort of composability with them, so maybe like notes can be composed into threads, and then threads can be embedded inside of other notes, and then so round and round you go and create like larger social structures that way, like social media structures that way, in the same way that like programmers are used to functions compose. You can build bigger and bigger functions into it and stuff like that. So I think those are the things that would have been exciting about it. But kind of I got the sense that ActivityPub was so focused on being a Facebook beater. It's like Facebook but decentralized, so that we can have our privacy back or something like that.
Right.
That I feel like they kind of miss the forest for the trees here in that sense. But I would say hope is not all lost. I mean, well, because like anybody can build stuff on there, and you and I can freely like build the things that we're talking about, and so we can talk about like why don't we? And so like one of the things that we're asking each other in the pregame is like along this line, if you could do this sort of stuff on Activity Hub, and like are there any like social applications that would kind of fit this bill? Like would it be social media, or would there be like other types of social applications? And like what kind of social applications would want participation from external networks besides social networks? Like
Yeah.
Could you think of any?
Yeah, I think I don't know about the external networks part or the federation part, but
Well, so that isn't that the whole point of having an activity bus because ActivityPub? Because if you don't, I mean, like you could just do something like a Notion, right? Because Notion is self-contained. Like that universe for a Notion user is self-contained unless they selectively make things public.
yeah, I see. Yeah, I mean, so I do have an interesting idea along those lines, but actually, I think I will, if you relax this,
Mm-hmm.
it must be dependent on federation. I do think that there are new ways in which people are collaborating, which we were talking about in
Mm-hmm.
the pregame. Like, for example, people are using Discord in a lot of interesting ways.
Mm-hmm.
And Discord is, at the end of the day, or fundamentally, as far as a company is concerned, a chat app. But that doesn't mean that people are necessarily only using it for chat. Like a very interesting use case that piggybacked on top of Discord is Midjourney, which is an AI art generation company. And what they did in order to bootstrap their service is that they used Discord channels or the Discord server as a way for people to input the prompts that they wanted to generate art from, and
Mm-hmm.
then there would be a Discord bot that would then post the picture that corresponded to that art or to that prompt, and it was kind of a social experiment or social AI art collective, in that you could see what other people were prompting, you could see the result of it, and you could learn from each other different prompt techniques, etc. And so it was not just a AI art
Mm-hmm.
project, but it was there. It had a social component to it, right? And you could imagine that they could potentially have used ActivityPub because you could have some type of activity like prompt or something, and
Mm-hmm.
then in response to that, this AI would reply with an image object or something like this, and you could
Yeah.
subscribe to this feed of events, and maybe they could build a nice UI on top of that, and they would get that kind of social protocol for free.
Yeah, I really thought so. I didn't like the execution of the Midjourney bot. Like
Mm.
the user experience was pretty clunky, and you had to just kind of wait for your reply from the bot. And if you missed it, I'm like, I don't know where to find it again. And eventually, I figured it out. Like in Midjourney, you can have a web page that tells you where this sort of stuff is. Like, but that kind of implementation aside, I thought that implementing Midjourney, which is a like AI image generation um, service inside of Discord, was actually quite genius because, like you said, users can see what other people are using as a prompt to generate these images. And because AI prompting is something new and people are hungry and eager to learn from each other, it's just a way for the community to collectively learn how to use these things. And that really drives and boosts engagement. And I really thought that was really clever how they decided to use that as the thing. And did they need to use ActivityPub? Obviously not, because they didn't use it at all, right?
Yeah, right.
And but like, could they have? And I think that it's just that the story is not there when it comes to distribution, because like if there were a lot of people already on Activity Hub, really you would really think of it as an option, because I know if I were building it, I would think of it as an option if the people are already there. But because
Hmm.
they're not, I'm like, why would I put the time and effort to integrate with ActivityPub if there's nobody there, right? And so
Yeah.
the chicken and an egg problem. And so when I think about why the internet got popular as much as it did, I think one large contributing factor was that there was people that wanted to look for the information and people that wanted to find those people looking for the information, and they can all do it without anybody's permission. And so it just became a flywheel. And so people that are publishing get distribution for free effectively, right? Which wasn't really possible before the internet. And people that were looking for stuff found niches that were up their alley that they couldn't get any other way in the library. And so basically, I guess one of the things is the internet had no competition in those two regards. Whereas today, the story is really different. Like, can you get a feed of stuff besides ActivityPub?
You got so many feeds.
Right?
Everything has a feed now. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I think the distribution story for people building on ActivityPub needs to be much stronger than it is right now. But that said, like, that's something that I've flogged as a dead horse already. Maybe we can flog it some more later on this episode. But like,
sure.
If that were the case, like if that is the case that it attracts people, then definitely I think it's a really compelling thing that you don't know what people are going to use it for, but if you put it out there, they're going to find some way to recombine it, and that would give your app distribution. And so Midjourney, like if there are other people, not just Midjourney users in their like closed off Discord, sees the prompts and what they can generate, like if there are people like reading off of ActivityPub all the time, then you could see what's going on. Actually, why didn't they build it off of Twitter? That might get way more distribution than retweets, right?
Yeah, and you would really make those prompts and replies public and get people excited.
Right.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. And I think that we were talking about distribution. I think that there is no shortage now of ways for people to get distribution, for individuals to get distribution, right? So ActivityPub providing one more feed is not, I think, a very compelling value prop. But like what you were saying, what needs help getting distribution now are things like apps. So far, because of the way that the centralized services work, it's really hard for new use cases to get an edge in terms of promoting their new service. There are
you talking about on things like the App Store or some other place where there's like people are paying attention?
I think it's very hard if you're starting a new service from scratch, and I'll go into what a new service from scratch means. If you're starting something new, you currently have to bootstrap your own social network, so to speak. Even if you're not a social networking app, you need to bootstrap some distribution mechanism or something within your own app to get people excited and sharing, whatever the usage and use case scenarios and whatnot. For example, Midjourney created a Discord channel for people to do this. But it's not possible to piggyback on top of existing feeds that people are already on, where the eyeballs are, like Twitter, right? You can. There have been a few good use cases of this. For example, ChatGPT, even though that's not really a protocol or a social service or anything like that, the way that they gain distribution is by making those conversations very screenshotable, and people are posting screenshots on Twitter, right? And I think very quickly people were like, hey, what's going on? This is a new app. This is something I should check out.
Honestly, like I don't know if that was part of their design. It's just screenshotting was like the lowest common denominator. Like people, I would have said that ChatGPT was so compelling as a product, people were willing to screenshot it and put it on Twitter.
Okay, fair enough. I think ChatGPT has a lot of magic behind it, besides that it's very screenshotable. It's not even that screenshotable. But, if you think about another use case, which actually did maybe make use a little bit more of these social dynamics, like one that comes to mind is Wordle. because Wordle generated that little pixel grid that showed how quickly you were able to solve the puzzle, and people were posting that on where were they posting? Twitter, chat,
text messages to friends,
group chats.
Yeah.
And so that was a great way for that new app, Wordle, to get distribution, because it was piggybacking off of where people were already talking to each other, right? The existing feeds where information was flowing. And it was able to do this because it managed to encode basically its activity, whatever, like puzzle solve activity or something, as a sequence of emojis, which happen to now be supported everywhere. But that's still sort of a hack, right? But you can imagine in some steady state scenario where everybody is using Mastodon or something like this, that a future Wordle or a future ChatGPT or whatever would be able to generate activities that then get fed into these existing streams of information, and that's the means of distribution or visibility for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe this is like one marketing channel that's still untapped, because like there are enough people that are using Mastodon, and so if you can identify a massive chunk of them that you want to market to, I mean, ActivityPub may not be a bad way to go, because then people can start following on Mastodon and stuff like that. And so the argument then is like, why not Twitter? And so maybe one thing that you can do is that this activity feed is not just for humans, but it's also machine readable as well. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it's something like a markdown where both machines and people can read it, or you just have a separate stream for computers for the same sort of information.
Well, ActivityPub is just arbitrary JSON objects, so that can be read by the machines as well. You can have metadata.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I was thinking that the body of the thing would have to contain the message, but you're right, because the specification's so underspecified, you can actually stuff a whole bunch of stuff in there that other people may or may not use, and so that's perfectly valid activity pub messages. So yeah, I think that's there, but I don't know, we've lost the plot on this particular story as an industry for a while, and I don't know, my optimism is that if people recognize it as a distribution mechanism, then I think it'll pick up, rather than something that is trying to outcompete where the incumbents are already thriving as much as they stumble. Because like I notice all sorts of bugs on Twitter page, and I'm still using it for better or for worse, right? So yeah, I think there is something there with that. And so then going back to other social applications, were there kind of other uses that you think would be good for ActivityPub?
Yeah, I think one that's interesting to me, and maybe it wouldn't be ever a mainstream use case. Actually, okay, there are two. Scratch this. Okay. Yeah, there are two. One is going to be really fun and mainstream, and one I think is a little bit more nerdy, but is worth going into. Right. There's going back to the machine readable stuff. I think we were talking about how one of the agents, what do they call it? Agents or actors?
Actors.
In this ActivityPub vocabulary, they have a few people, organizations, something else, but there should be bots, because I think we're now in this like age of AI bots, and people are spinning up new ones all the time. And so it would be very, very cool to interact with AI bots over ActivityPub, because then there's a lot of interoperability. Like, for example, I can't talk to ChatGPT on anything other than chat.openai. Yeah, that website, right? But like, ideally, maybe this is a little scary idea. ChatGPT should just be there. It should be a on Twitter or something, right? And you can just chat.
Omnipresent being on Twitter, inserting itself into every thread.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, that kind of sounds like the movie Her. Have you seen that movie?
I actually haven't. No, but I know the premise. I know the premise.
I would recommend it because one of the things about the AI in the movie is that as the AI gets more and more intelligent, she can have simultaneous conversations with a whole bunch of other people, including other bots. And so for her, it seems like she's just talking to the original owner, but like she's simultaneously doing that at the same time. And I can imagine ChatGPT, while it's like melting down GPUs, because what else are they good for? To have a lot of simultaneous conversations with a lot of people on Twitter all at the same time,
right.
Inserting itself into whatever paperclip making conversation there is, right? So,
right.
So I can totally see that, and so I think barring kind of the safety issues for the time being, and people worry about that, but like having bots interject themselves into conversations isn't that crazy, because you see it on Reddit all the time now, right? There's plenty of helpful bots on Reddit.
Yeah, there are a lot of shitty bots. Most of them now are just like converting your units to metric or something like that. But yeah, there are helpful ones. You're right.
Right, there are helpful ones, and so you can imagine with the LLMs that we covered in the recent episode in ChatGPT in the season. Check it out if you haven't already. Like that is a more robust way for people to interact. Do you remember? Have people forgotten already that there was a time when people thought chatbots were going to be like the next big thing?
I think that's still
that was
recent.
Yeah, that's recent enough. I don't know if people forgot or not. But
yeah, but that chatbot wave was
a year. Yeah, after 1 year, people were like, "Oh, this is not going to work."
Yeah, because the technology just wasn't there. But also, those chatbots were siloed. Like I think those chatbots where you put a chatbot on your website or in your support flow or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I think what we're talking about is the public chatbots. Like how now we have public intellectuals on Twitter. We have public chatbots.
I think we're talking about public chatbots that insert themselves into different conversations, as opposed to chatbots that are just in Slack and Discord channels. I don't know where I'm going with this.
It's fine. I'll put it in the show notes. There's some interesting work on Twitter towards this. There is a Twitter account called AI Mindflow, which is run by this interesting guy, Kevin Fisher. But basically, AI Mindflow is what we're talking about. It is a bot that is like a multimodal agent that can understand both pictures and text. And if you post a picture, sometimes it will, if it follows you, will reply with like a poem about the picture that you posted, or sometimes it'll generate pictures itself and post them. It'll just talk to you. It'll just do random stuff, right? And it's
like
kind of fun.
Interesting party guest. It's like when people hire professional party goers to be interesting at a party. That's kind of like what it's doing.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool, when it drops by. But the idea is that it's a persistent entity that for now it's a gimmick, right? And it's like, fun, like, hey, we have this interesting party guest. But you could imagine that as these chatbots become more specialized and have more personality, and you use them for different things, then they could also, for example, maybe they can like do things like resolve disputes, right? If there's a dispute going on, it can de-escalate somehow, like skillfully.
Well, I was thinking like fact checking, like when people are spewing garbage on these microblogging platforms, like you get, or give context. I thought that Twitter's context feature, whatever it's called, when the little context box pops up, and like I've mentioned many times before, like I am not by any means caught up with anything pop culture. And so sometimes when things are obviously jokes to other people, I'm just like, I don't know what's going on here. And having a little bit of context helps. And, having a bot that inserts context in there would be really helpful, or facts checks things that people are saying, or gives nuances, right? Like, this is
Right.
true in this sense, but not another. Or like if people are talking about something, you can display graphs from our world in data or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
that would be a means of distribution for these sort of companies.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting.
And so I guess the caveat here is that these new wave of chatbots are much better at finding the specific thing that is relevant to the conversation, so that you're not just spamming something, right? Like,
Mhm.
if people are talking about like childbirth, they might be interested in the preparation for childbirth rather than childbirth as public policy. And so you would want to give graphs in the latter case and not the former, right? Because
Right.
yeah. So that's what I mean.
Yeah. And so tying it back to ActivityPub, I think the way that it could be helpful is by providing the medium by which these bots are
Yeah.
consuming the activity that's going on, so that they can ingest it and then filter it and say, hey, maybe I should contribute here. And then it can now interface programmatically. Now you could ask, like, why couldn't you just use the Twitter API? But
Yeah.
I think here actually there is ActivityPub does have a significant advantage in that you don't really get through these centralized platforms. You don't get like a raw hose, like fire hose of data anymore. Like, you have to pay a
Yeah.
lot of money. And so this is where the sort of incentives, the economic incentives for centralization, are misaligned with actual useful use cases, because
Yeah.
it's really hard to build such a bot today.
Maybe if Activity Bus paired its archival service with IPFS, then you could offload the bandwidth to download that sort of stuff. Although I don't know, it would no longer be a real time stream because it takes a while for the stuff to propagate all through IPFS. But yeah, maybe if
But
you only
wait,
just want the daily thing, right, rather than a real time thing,
yeah,
that
but
would be
actually,
useful.
I think so. So independent of the bot thing, that's like an interesting use case that you probably couldn't do very easily today, which is like
Yeah.
archive.org or something.
Mm-hmm.
If they want to persist what is honestly a lot of very, very important information,
Yeah.
important discourse is happening on Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
unless, like, through the benevolence of Twitter, they donate like a data dump or something to archive.org.
Yeah.
Like, but if in ActivityPub you could have such a setup, right,
Mm-hmm.
where you have
Yeah.
the IPFS or something just
Mm-hmm.
read from the activity stream and then like just persist that, or maybe
Yeah.
it samples it and only like follows or archives the most important 1 million accounts on ActivityPub, but at least you'd at least be able to archive something.
Yeah. I mean, I know the Library of Congress archives tweets now, so I'm resting. I would rest in peace knowing that some of my tweets are ending up there.
Yeah.
But I don't know if they had cooperation from Twitter for a fire hose, or whether they just kind of reading the stuff themselves, or they had to probably cooperate with
I think
somehow,
I
right?
think Twitter
Yeah.
like actually just donated
Mm-hmm.
access to Library of Congress
Mm-hmm.
there, but yeah.
And so, yeah, I wonder if it's continual or if it's a snapshot sort of thing.
Right.
But yeah, like definitely, like a lot. You have to be the Library of Congress to do stuff like that with Twitter, I guess. But in Activity Hub, this is the permissionless aspect. Like, you can just do it, right?
Right. Yeah. And you
Yeah,
could
that's a
do
good
this
point.
for yeah, I guess any arbitrary accounts as well. Like, I remember that when whatever was that guy's name, Sam Bankman-Fried, was doing some Twitter shenanigans, and there was some suspicion that he was posting in a particular pattern of way such
Oh
that
yeah,
he was evading some Twitter archival services, so that
yeah.
he was basically secretly deleting tweets and then posting like a replacement tweet in such a way, within a short time span, such that it would go undetected that he had deleted the old tweets or something.
Oh
But all of this stuff is basically just exploiting the fact that the archival services don't have access to the raw
yeah.
stream of his
Hmm.
tweets.
Yeah.
And so, but ideally, with public figures like CEOs and whatnot,
Michael
you
Burry, the he also deletes all his tweets, and so there's
mm,
actually another Twitter account that simply screenshots all his tweets and republishes them.
right. But you would want, for cases like this where CEOs and other public
Yeah,
figures, you would want to keep a record of what they say
yeah.
in these events like this where there's some controversy.
Hmm.
Then ActivityPub allows you to freely access that information and archive it,
Hmm.
whereas in Twitter it's either you have to do weird hacks like screenshots, or you have to run like these kind of lossy archival bots which might miss
Yeah,
some important stuff.
white miss. That's a pretty good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but definitely, if you can, I think if you can buy into this particular use case, it's not a far stretch to think that there are other things that you would want to do with a feed of tweets, right? I mean, there's the typical like analytics sort of stuff, but I think you would be able to like scour for a subset, like for customer sentiment on a particular brand for research, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so right now you can kind of do that, but once again, you don't have like the full fire hose and stuff like that and so maybe in some sense it's good enough, like definitely for any startup, like just poke around a little with a couple keywords, but for larger companies, they might want something more fine grained, and maybe also like financial institutions that trade. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them trade on sentiment on Twitter
Mm-hmm.
for like the high frequency traders. Maybe,
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. Well, so I do know that there are traders that looked at satellite photos of parking lots of different retailers to be able to tell how good the season was, and then
Mm.
make their investments based on those counts. And
Right.
so I wouldn't be surprised if there's already something that is like reading sentiment off of Twitter.
Yeah, that's fair. Although that does raise a question to me, because, and maybe this is a good time to get into this, a lot of the ActivityPub usage right now is on apps like Mastodon,
Mastodon, yeah.
which are positioning themselves as a ideological alternative to centralization, right? Like the
If you
people who
want,
are
yeah, if you want that, you got to get into crypto. You're in the wrong place, buddy.
yeah, well, it's like a intersection of people who don't like centralization, but then don't like money. It's like they don't like crypto because it smells like money, and so I don't know. Maybe this is too cynical, but it does seem like a lot of the discourse around ActivityPub is, and a lot of the advertising of these services is like basically like no ads, no fees, it's free, privacy, all this stuff. And so, and the reason I segued into this is because you were talking about how corporations could trade on the activity on ActivityPub,
Mm-hmm.
but it seems like at least the seed community would really hate that, right? Like,
so did the early internet. I mean, like they called it an eternal September. Like, who were the original people on the internet? Like researchers on news groups, and then all of a sudden the commercialization. Like people forget that, but like the early internet users really hated it when like the unwashed masses, the rest of us, you and I, got on the internet and started like selling stuff, and I don't know, just a whole bunch of teenage kids and people trying to sell stuff. Like they really hated that.
Yeah. Do you think that this is a either or situation? Like ActivityPub has to loosen their grip on some of this ideological stuff in order for it to actually take off in any meaningful way?
I think they can hold on to an ideology, but I think they should get a new one.
Okay, well, all right.
I think it's the same thing that I said before. Like, you're not going to beat the incumbents by playing the incumbents at their own game, because like the ideology, the benefits of ideology are not strong enough jobs to be done to ask to force people to change. Like, unless you have like something catastrophic, like a catastrophic event will have to happen. And so like things like Elon Musk buying Twitter was catastrophic enough event that people tried switching, right? But I don't know how many stayed. But like, you can't build, it's really hard to build something that isn't a incremental daily use sort of thing. Like when people talk about, like when people give startup advice, like how much of a hair on fire problem is this? Like are people like, this is such a problem, I would pay money for somebody else to fix it yesterday. And then the other thing is, how frequently do you have that problem? And ActivityPub, like these things about privacy and stuff, I think people do care about privacy in specific contexts. Like if all of a sudden we are in an authoritarian government for some reason, I don't know, there was a coup. Yeah, people might care about that a lot all of a sudden, right? And so, but you can't grow you can't grow a product just betting on outlier events. It has to be something that is people are running into day to day. That's why I say, like, I myself like privacy. Like, I've been using DuckDuckGo for a long time for the same reason, and same thing with Firefox. But those are not. But like, you can't just say Facebook but decentralized, or like, I don't think that by itself is enough. Privacy, maybe it's a better argument nowadays, because I guess I can point myself as an evidence of somebody that switched for stuff like that. But and I think people do care about that a lot more, but I don't think that is necessarily sufficient. You have to be an order of magnitude better at something that the incumbents can't do already, right? And so this is why I say, and it seems to hold true across the board as far as I can tell, like in seeing what startups succeed and fail, observing my own consumer decisions, asking other people about their own consumer decisions, like the switching, like how people decide what to buy and what to stick with, like because switching is tough. Like people have other things that they have other better things to do, right? They want to be like, playing video games and going on dates and stuff like that, not like figuring out whether they need to switch your thing out to some other thing. Like, unless you're giving them video games or dates, like they're not thinking about you, right?
That's the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Clearly,
So like, nobody wants to like take on extra work if they can help it. And so that's why I'm saying like their ideology needs to kind of fixate on something that is a different kind of vision, that focuses on something that the incumbents don't already do and cannot do. And so when I think about that like river of internet stuff, it's compelling in an abstract way. I don't know how compelling it is practically, but I know that every application really cares about distribution. So if you provide another channel for distribution, definitely I think people that are building stuff will want to hop on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the advantage that something like a centralized network couldn't do, which is just okay, this is going to sound kind of crazy. I kind of want to enter the Wild West again, right? Like, I think that it would be so cool if ActivityPub promised me, or whatever the ActivityPub based apps like Mastodon or whatever promised me, like, come here, you can talk with all kinds of cool bots. You can discover all kinds of, new interesting games and apps and things which are like publishing their activities, and you can discover them, and you can play along, and maybe you can play along collaboratively. Maybe you can play collaborative games on ActivityPub. Like, maybe, why not?
Yeah,
right?
like maybe the way that Reddit does its social experiments with like the giant canvas and that sort of stuff, right? And so like if you had something to spin up, I mean, a no-code builder from the stuff from ActivityPubs, maybe, I don't know, like whatever it is, like just a way for you to put that, like, participate somehow, right?
Yeah, participate, right? Like, you want to be part of something, and I think a good example is Reddit does this, fun games like the giant canvas, and then they had another one where you were randomly assigned a team, and you had to like earn points for your team, like Team Periwinkle versus like Orange Red or whatever. Like, but basically they do a good job of creating these social games or collaborative games.
What's another one? Don't push the button. See how long everybody can collectively not push a button.
Yeah. and in fact, like on Twitch and things, like people have like Twitch plays Pokemon. Or whatever, right?
Yeah. Twitch plays, that could totally go on ActivityPub for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And so I think if ActivityPub was like a place or a thing where I could go and it was lively in a way that centralized platforms couldn't be lively because they want to control that experience. They're very opinionated.
Can't take the risk, right? Yeah, they can't. Yeah, and because no PM at Facebook is going to be like, look, guys, I think we should do like Facebook plays Pokemon, right?
right. Yeah,
that guy's not getting promoted. He's not getting his like house in the bay. He's not feeding his 2.5 kids or whatever it is, right? So he's not. That's just something that nobody's gonna in a big company is gonna put their neck out on. Much less like So yeah, I think that there's this big potential, like pent up potential for it, but I think that narrative is lost, and I think that's the thing that we keep like running our heads around. Like we keep talking and then kind of circling back over here, and so I think it's compelling in the abstract, but we're trying to get to like the concrete aspect of it here, right? That's what you're trying to do. Like just imagine like a Wild West of things that are happening, just kind of to recreate the feeling of the Wild West of the early internet, right? Like it's just like the early internet was even weirder than things are on today. Like you can find stuff on like TikTok that's weird, or even on Reddit, but like early internet was just like it looked like MySpace. Like, I don't know, for people that don't know, just look at like GeoCity pages. Like just look them up on the internet.
And some of those pages were like weird, like about like esoteric topics, and like you would just and there would be fun like explorers like stumble upon or whatever, and you'd just find like weird things, right? And so I think like
yeah, and so that's the sort of thing that you think is really possible to recreate with ActivityPub if the I mean, a number of things would have to happen, but like one of the draws you're saying is that because it's permissionless and people can publish, like one ideology they can try to go after is like giving people a new experience, a sense of the Wild West that doesn't really exist in the public sphere in the internet anymore. I think like you still have small private pockets here and there, but like, and so if you could promise that, then I think that's something that the incumbents cannot do. And it goes back to the an ideology, but like a different one, right?
right. Yeah, and I think that it's an ideology that relies on the ingenuity of the crowd, the wisdom of the crowd, or maybe the idiocy of the crowd. Like, it basically just, if you give the internet at large like tools to do things, they come up with all kinds of weird things. Like even like Twitch plays, like it's not like some PM at Twitch was like, oh, let's support this weird like way in which you can collaboratively play video games. People just figured this out, right? And I think people will figure out many different things, and clearly people are ingenious enough to hack on top of centralized platforms. Like even Twitch plays, I don't know how it's implemented, but like they must have some bot that's like reading the chat and then like that's a hack, right? But I think ActivityPub, all of that kind of stuff could be just native, it could be baked in, and it could even be much more complicated and wonderful, because you're not just having to do these weird hacks. And yeah, so I think that could very much be the ideology, is just, this is a collaborative space, right? Like it makes the internet, or it makes this like feed into this like collaborative canvas in which people can build all kind of apps, people can build integrations, you can interact with bots, and that's something I don't see anywhere else. Maybe people are trying to do this on Twitter, but I think Twitter is becoming, if anything, more closed. It's not becoming, or it's not opening up towards these possibilities. I think they should take advantage of it. Of course, I think there's all these problems as well when you think about just opening stuff up to the internet, about abuse and harassment and all these things. I don't know. Actually, those are important problems that I don't want to think about, because they kind of ruin my utopia.
Utopia, right? I mean, I mean, in reading the specs, I think they do try to address it. There are mechanisms in place in ActivityPub protocol to address these sort of things, because it's kind of well known by now the sort of things that people can do. But even then, I think even before that social layer, like the implementation, like it seems like the spec is unspecified, and people spend a lot of time like reverse engineering the dominant player in that particular protocol to do something. Like all that needs to be tightened up so that it's easier to build stuff on there. Like right now, I don't think it's easy at all. So before any of the stuff that we're talking about can happen, I think the spec probably needs to be tightened up, which can be tough because it sounds like it was designed by committee. So there's I mean, I don't know, but maybe that also means that it's ripe for a dominant player to come in and just write the spec. If it's unspecified, then that just means that my implementation is the spec. So right. If you come in here and dominate, then maybe you can just write the spec that way.
Yeah, and it's not like if you're using some HTTP library or web server in your language, it's not like you're going and reading the HTTP spec, which in fact, I've never in my career have accessed that spec. So I don't even know what that looks like. So, but you use libraries and you use abstractions is what I mean. Yeah. And so I think that there are a few in my reading. There's like one, a famous one for Go, which I think is being used a lot. There's one in Elixir. I think that Mastodon, I don't know, I don't want to misspeak. There's like a famous ActivityPub implementation in Elixir for this kind of thing. And so, but I think if there becomes one standardized one in the major languages, then it's something that you don't have to think about anymore, and then you can just plug it into
I see. Yeah, well, so I think maybe this is when they were still arguing about the spec and developing it and like running through the early iterations, but it sounded like things were underspecified. So even if people wanted to interoperate, there were still specific details that they needed to work out in order to do the implementation. That I think that was all I was getting at. So
I see.
The barrier to entry needs to be a lot lower if what we're waxing lyrical about is able to happen. That was the only thing I meant to say.
I think that one interesting way that you can reconstruct content in this way is related to our episode on Xanadu and transclusion. The whole idea of transclusion is that and you should watch our episode on this if you want the full details. But the idea is that you can include bits and pieces of other people's content to weave this sort of meta narrative, right? So you could, for example, if you are writing an explainer on some topic, then you can include, something that you wrote about something, and then something somebody else wrote, and interject maybe with my own thoughts about it as well, and package it up into some new form.
Yeah.
Right? And so I wonder, ActivityPub does seem to support that, because actually being a hypertext protocol, you can actually reference other objects by URL.
Yeah.
And so can you build a meta object which then references bits and pieces of other objects and publish that? And maybe even create like a referenced activity so that you can keep track of kind of the backlinks, like this thing is referring to that thing. Can you build a hypertext that way, or a hypermedia that way?
Maybe. I mean, like, you and I have that long-running Twitter note-taking app idea.
Right. Have we talked about this on this podcast? We always talk about it after the fact, but
I want to say yes, but I guess you can give a quick rundown for our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I guess briefly, it's the idea that the way people write Twitter threads and then quote tweet their own threads to create this kind of graph structure of their thoughts
and ideas.
Of their ideas
and how they're interconnected.
Yeah. So you could have a note-taking app that's like that, and you could even make it so that it's multiplayer, that you can reference other people's ideas and weave them into your own notes.
Yeah, and the advantage there is that you're thinking aloud, and you get feedback as to what ideas of yours people find interesting and useful, and they're publicly referenced, and that means anybody can also participate, which I guess for better or for worse, but like then you get fast iteration on these ideas, and so that's kind of a way to collaboratively think together, actually, with you at the helm.
Yeah. Actually, that seems like a good use case for ActivityPub, right? Like, in fact, if I were to build it, and I keep saying that I'm going to build this, over some weekend when I have time, and I never have time. Like, if there was just a robust ActivityPub library that would give for free the idea of, publishing something and it being accessible to other users, I don't want to build my own account system. I don't want to build my own whatever follow mechanism and whatever. Like, I think it'd be really cool if I could just import ActivityPub.js or something, and then I just worry about my own domain objects, and then just let ActivityPub take care of the idea that people can follow each other's notes and reference each other's notes and reply and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, and so I guess this goes back to kind of like, what can you do with deconstructed content? And I guess that's the thing. When things are deconstructed, then you can link to it in any different place, because the granularity is so much smaller, right? Because before, web pages are on the granularity of an article, because it was mimicking newspapers and magazines, right? Because it was completely impractical to link to just a paragraph in everything, in every magazine article. But with the internet, it's totally possible, and we decided to like cut it up. We decided to cut it up, and so now that means we can recombine it in this graph where people can think together. That sounds pretty exciting, actually. And I think even more compelling for me is if you have these bots that we were talking about, the LLMs, coming in here to helpfully tie insights which would be connections to things that you've already collected the thought about, but never actually made the connection, to kind of tie these threads of thought more closely together. That I think would be interesting and helpful as well. I mean, like, you see this sort of stuff in the Star Slate Codex community, but they do it just by talking to each other. But I imagine they might want something like, or I imagine this is another way to have a discourse about topics through threading, and then having bots help make connections if people aren't making them already.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, I thought we weren't going to talk about this, but we will now. So there, there's an interesting company, organization, nonprofit organization called Ought, which is very interested in helping advance human knowledge. It's actually very aligned with Less Wrong and the Rationality and Slate Star Codex communities. And basically their mission is to build interfaces that help you collaboratively arrive at truth. And so the way that they imagine it works is that you deconstruct a problem. Let's say you're working on like a problem like how to solve nuclear fusion or something like this. And there's a lot of sub-problems. There's a lot of discussions that can be had. Maybe you collect evidence. You go off and run an experiment. I go off and run an experiment. And we want to collect all this stuff together to arrive at some knowledge, right? Shared knowledge. And so what they imagine is that in the future, we will do this using some shared substrate, and we'll also collaborate with things like bots or AIs that can help us reason.
It seems like there are people that are already on it. They're just not on ActivityPub.
They're just not on ActivityPub. Yeah, but I think like the core innovation, because they're doing a lot of innovation on the kind of human-computer interaction, like the interface of how we would lay out complex problems using computers like this. And then they're also concerned about training models and AIs that can help us. But the least of their worries, right? Their core competence is probably not in building out some social infrastructure, right? Like, let's say that they actually succeed in their mission, then ideally they would want to delegate this kind of backbone of how all these parties are talking to each other. Yeah, they should use something like ActivityPub, and they could maybe make their own objects, problem object or evidence object or something like that, and just send those down the pipe and have those be distributed.
Yeah, so you mean like extend the vocabulary of ActivityPub to include these new things that you can send down the pipe for the ActivityPub protocol, right?
Yeah, ideally. I think that the I'm not sure. I know that there's a fairly limited set of object types that are built in, but I do think there is some notion of extensibility. Like you can add new things to this taxonomy.
Or you can just co-opt one of the existing ones.
And just make it a note, but then it has extra metadata, and that makes it into something else. Or something.
Yeah, like, so what'd you say, a problem? Then you can co-opt the question activity. Perhaps. Right. And so normally it's supposed to represent a question being asked. I guess it's in line. So it's a research question, right? It's the problem statement.
Yeah.
And so question objects are extension of the intransitive activity, blah, blah, blah. But basically it's where people are asking something.
I see.
Of their followers. So that you could co-opt that into a problem statement.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I hope that they just allow people to extend these objects, because then you can just work more natively in these things. But anyway, like, I think those are all details. I think that this is a kind of use case where you have this collaboration and you're working on this shared, what did you call it? Like deconstructed information, but then you want to kind of keep track of that graph of deconstructed information because you want to package it up into some final conclusion, let's say that.
Either like you can imagine like storytelling is one where like, or you're trying to convince people of stuff, so you weave a narrative. I mean, that's not very scientific. It's selective cherry picking, but I mean, that's sometimes what you have to do to move large swaths of people, for better or for worse. But like you can imagine stuff like that. And so I think right now people already do that. It's kind of in an ad hoc way with our current medium, but like with the ActivityPub, it would be much more specific, concrete, deliberate, because you have all these like pieces of a narrative just strewn about.
Yeah. And you the interoperability allows you to kind of reference each other or tie them together.
Yeah.
Right.
Tie them together because every piece of data is referenceable through a URL because it's based on like JSON linked data. So that seems like it's entirely possible. So I think we're at the part in the podcast where we have some notion of where this thing sort of could go. And so like if you wanted to take a position on this, like what would you do to invest in it, or whether with your money or your time?
Yeah, I think that what this thing needs are apps. Like if the vision and the position that ActivityPub should take is this is a place full of just cool stuff, then what it needs actually probably are interesting use cases that are just there and running, and then that's what brings people in, right? At least maybe at first it's some
Right.
nerds who want to interact with like weird bots, but then over time, more important people.
Like isitchristmas.com should publish to ActivityPub because it already does Twitter. So so you could have stuff like that.
Yeah, or like on Twitter, there's like that like little year progress bar.
Oh,
I hate
yeah.
every time I see it because it's always reminds me that I've wasted too much time of the year.
Wasted so much time, yeah.
But yeah, so, stuff like this, right? And it's kind of fun. And I think that,
but it's a stepping stone to people imagining that there are other things that they can do on there, right? And so everything starts off as a toy. So
yeah, exactly. And I think that that's kind of how I would take a position on it. Is it's a lot to ask of people to come up with a new either alternative for a big service or some new paradigm shifting app that is going to convince everybody of the decentralized web or the federated web or whatever. I think that it's going to start with these toys, and I think that the thing is, it's like we said, concerning that maybe neither you nor we hack on a lot of lots of little things all the time.
But by the mere fact that we're on this podcast talking about like completely disparate technology, I'm sure like our Zig listeners are like, what did I subscribe to? Like, what is all this other stuff, right? And so like, given that, like, we should be people that are like super excited to hack on this stuff, and yet, so take us out,
So I think that's the gap, right? Is that I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the lack of familiarity, or maybe the libraries in the major languages are not yet mature for ActivityPub. But ideally, I just say import ActivityPub in my favorite language, and then somehow the app that I'm building is just much richer for it, right? Like that now I get this kind of pub sub mechanism. I get whatever discovery or follow or reply functionality, and then I can just like kind of build the thing that I want to build, which is maybe it's a small game, maybe it's just a small little app, and I get plugged into this rich ecosystem, right? Like I think that's the goal. Now, how can we get there? I don't know. I mean, I think how can we get there is, one, the people who are building the implementations of this protocol, hopefully over time they work out the kinks. So you mentioned that there's some underspecified semantics for this protocol. Hopefully those get ironed out and people standardize on some implementation. And then so that's step one or step zero. And then I think that being done, I think that the way that you can take a position on it is, if you're building something that has this shape, like it looks like you would want you want people to follow each other, or you would want to broadcast information within your app, maybe if it's particularly a toy app, try using ActivityPub. Like I think I would, for the Twitter thread note-taking app that we mentioned, which I intend to build at some point, maybe it'd be worth building it on top of ActivityPub just to see what it's like.
Yeah, I mean, for listeners out there, if you get to it before Sri, I guess you can. It's along the lines of Sri and Will's. What is it? YC, where we give you ideas that we never implement.
right. We can't promise that one's going to be $1 billion idea, but it'll be something.
Yeah, and like you said, like we should get T-shirts, but like the only way to get ActivityPub popular is to build $1 billion business on top of it. Then it will solve all the problems. I think for me, it's the same dead horse that I've been flogging the entire episode. I think the way to take a position on it is to see if you can use ActivityPub as a distribution mechanism for the users that already exist on the network today. And the way to do that is to publish information from your app that would be public, and then people can either follow it or they can build apps that consume those little pieces of event data from your app and do other things with it to cover use cases that you don't have the time or wherewithal or resources to build, that gets you then more users. And so it becomes this flywheel. And so if other people can see that it's a viable distribution strategy, then I think other people will jump on. And so that's a good way to kind of build the ecosystem to the point where you have this weird and wild west that you were talking about.
Yeah, and maybe as a call to action for any ActivityPub committee members or whoever that might be listening, because we know we talk about technologies all the time, and sometimes the creators pop in and say hello to us. So like, if we have any such people here, I would say that a really great way to kind of bootstrap this is to have like a hackathon. I know that there have been a lot of interesting like AI hackathons that have really explored the edges of what's possible with like AI right now. And I think similarly with ActivityPub, if you can build that momentum around just like let's play with this, let's see what's possible, then people start getting more ideas, right? And they say, hey, I saw somebody build this, and like let me try a different version for something else.
Do you think that ActivityPub is 10 years old now, so do you think they've had some of these or like explored enough of or maybe they kind of missed out on the bigger picture that we're painting here because they're so focused on being like a Facebook beater sort of thing?
Yeah, so I think specifically for this like Wild West type thing, like I think that this is the kind of thing where hackathons are great because it's kind of low effort, low commitment. There's like kind of a playful energy, and you kind of learn mimetically. You see like, hey, that team over there is like trying this, like let's try it as well. And so I think that's a really great forcing function to kind of like create this a rich ecosystem. And I think that this is the right time because maybe 5 years ago there weren't anybody who was even using Mastodon or ActivityPub. Now there's the moment where I don't know how many people stuck with Mastodon since leaving Twitter.
But there is a breakout of some sort. Like
there's a breakout, right? And so this is the time to hit the gas, right? And I think something like a hackathon could really accelerate that.
I wonder how many VCs would love that pitch. Like, dude, we're gonna do ActivityPub. They're like, where's your LLM? Just throw that in there, whether you're doing it or not. Right. So that'll sell it. Yeah. Yeah, I think the short end of it is taking the position is that you can build on it. And I would, like if there's a good reason for you to do that, you should probably explore it. It has to fit, right? It can't just be decentralization, but I think the potential is actually there. Yeah, like you and I, for some of these episodes, we come in like, oh, where is the silver lining here? But I feel like we've covered some things where like we've reinvigorated the kind of the vision of of Twitter or app.net that was lost. And I do feel more excited about that because now it seems like people forgot about it. And when I look around the world, it's not like the world has moved on from that and there's no need for it. But like nobody's focused on it because there's all sorts of other things going on right now. Like there's drones, VR, AR, cryptocurrencies, AI. I don't know, whatever other like buzzy stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
And so like I think people have forgotten about this, but maybe this is something that is ripe either now or in the near future to kind of think about again beyond the scope of Elon Musk's antics driving all sorts of people to Mastodon. I think there's a bigger picture here that people should consider.
Yeah, totally. I think to sum up, for me, I am optimistic about making the web weird again. I think that is always going to be a strength of decentralization and just the wisdom of the crowds and whatnot. And so I'm optimistic that if ActivityPub and the Fediverse and all this can tap into that energy, then it can be successful. As for the specific implementation and the protocol and whatnot, I don't know enough. I haven't played around with it, but I hope that they can sort of, like you said, find a different ideology that sort of works for the consumer.
Yeah, we're rooting for you guys. So so do it. All right. So yeah, I mean, with that, I guess like, are you to the moon? Because it's been a while. We're more cautious about this one. But how do you feel?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm to the moon. I think I am on the sidelines, like really, really cheering super hard. Right, is where I am. Like I want this to succeed because I think the world needs it.
Yeah, I'm more kind of like people talk about exploring space and get excited about that, but forget that the oceans are still largely unexplored, and it's hard to get people excited for ocean exploration because it just doesn't have the same ring. There's no Star Trek of the ocean besides like, what is that, Cousteau in the submarine or something like that. But and it seems quaint now. But yeah, I mean, there's still. My instinct is that there's still something unexplored there, and with the confluence of some of the new technologies that are coming up the horizon, especially the LLMs, that might be potential to reinvigorate this idea of the feed for the internet.
So then I guess with that, our optimism and enthusiasm is in the depths of the ocean. This time. So yeah, if this episode opened your eyes, check out our other episodes where we talk about other edges of technology, why they're interesting and what future they point to. Check them out and subscribe. And be sure to check out our audio versions on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and write us a review so that we can bring other Techniumistas on board. And with that, this is Sri.
And this is Will.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.